Come along with me as we explore this super bizarre, unexplainable, mysterious death. I've covered an array of deaths over the last few years, but this one has just always stuck out in my mind. I can never quite put it down. I can never quite stop thinking about it. Though I have a pretty healthy relationship with the spirit world, I am not one to jump on the alien abduction or paranormal bandwagon when it comes to death. I always have to seek out every possible rational avenue first. Well, I've done that for this one, and I honestly still cannot eliminate potential alien suspects. Sigmund was a 56-year-old, fairly healthy miner from England. His routine was pretty unremarkable. He definitely did not engage in what we would call a high-risk lifestyle. Sigmund left his home one day in 1980 to go for a stroll to the store to pick up some groceries. He was last seen wearing a suit and a watch on his wrist. Sadly, he never made it to the store. He simply just appeared to vanish. For 5 days straight, family, friends, and authorities searched all around his neighborhood. They canvassed any nearby shops, bus stations, and highways. Not a single trace of him was rendered. It was as if he simply did not exist any longer. By the 5th day, his family began losing hope. Sigmund was not a flight risk. He was very settled into his life. He valued his stable routine. He was never the type that you would suspect to run away to begin a new life. He was frugal and simple. He didn't have any major outstanding bills or financial issues. He didn't have a lot of money, but he had enough to cover his needs and lifestyle. He also wasn't known to be depressed. He hadn't faced any recent hardships that could possibly induce a crisis. On the evening of that 5th day, authorities were radioed to a coal yard in Todmorden, England. This town only had a population of about 9,000 at the time, so police were not plentiful. Only one officer was able to take the page. Of course, that officer had no idea that this particular call was about to change his life forever. Once he arrived, it took a few minutes to discover why he was called there in the first place. There were coal piles scattered about with various heights. The moon was already peeking out, and a thick hazy hue was beginning to take hold. Eventually, he found the body of a man poised on top of a 10-foot coal pile. Upon further investigation, the officer found that the pile was completely undisturbed aside from its new topping. There wasn't a single footprint or any coal dustings to suggest that anybody had climbed this pile since it was created. It was as if this man's body was levitated through the air and placed atop this coal mountain. Once the officer got his footing sturdy on the coal and was able to climb up, he was greeted with a very eerie sight. He found himself with a frost reverberating up and down his bones. His stomach was hit with a pang of emptiness and cold. The dead man was glaring up at him with a pleading desperation. Now frozen in a perpetual state of utter terror, his expression was able to provoke a near paranormal response in the officer. He was quoted as saying, "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had a look of someone who had seen something or someone that had scared him to death. Something or someone put him on top of that pile of coal, and something scared him to death." I can't help but notice how the officer said something before saying someone multiple times. Once the body was transported to the coroner, things got even more strange. In fact, the coroner was quoted in saying multiple times that this case was the most mysterious and strange of his career, and that he still hasn't found the answers, even to his retirement. While inspecting the body, the coroner found that the man had some extensive burns covering the back of his head, neck, and shoulders. These were second-degree burns that were nearing third, but that's not even the weird part. An unknown ointment was found covering the burns. It appeared oily, but felt very adhesive. It clung to the skin as if it was forming a second barrier. You couldn't just easily slough it off. It seemed to take on a plastic-like form when it came in contact with exposed flesh. A sample was taken and sent off to scientists for testing. Not a single expert could ever identify the substance. It appears that it was completely unknown to our world. The coroner ruled the man's cause of death to be sudden cardiac arrest. The burns could never be explained. No investigation offered any clues into how the man got on top of the undisturbed coal pile. The body was identified as belonging to Sigmund. He was found wearing the suit he was last seen alive in. Strangely, his undershirt, wallet, and watch were missing and never found. Before I explain how this death may have occurred, there's a little more to this story that you need to know. 6 months after the responding officer found Sigmund's body, he witnessed a very strange occurrence near the same coal yard. An unidentified flying object with strange lights in the sky seemed to come closer and closer to him. It could somehow just hover above with zero sound. Luckily, he survived his encounter, but he was thoroughly disturbed and confused. He quit the police force. Suddenly, up was no longer up and the sky was no longer blue. Nothing made sense anymore. Being a true skeptic, it was very difficult for him to rationalize through this. Later, he was put under hypnosis, where he described being brought on board the UFO, where he was subjected to a physical exam by 2 non-human entities. He was then dropped back off in the place where he was taken. Of course, being a skeptic, he has said that he believes he had actually been recalling a dream that his conscious mind had forgotten about, which makes sense to me. Hypnosis is very controversial in memory recall because it is easily tainted by suggestion. False memories can inadvertently be planted in these sessions, so I suppose we will never know if he was recalling reality or a dream. Regardless, this entire case is still full of a lot of tomfuckery. There is another well-known case that draws many similarities to Sigmund's. Travis Walton was a forestry worker stationed in the Apache Sitgraves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona in 1975. He seemingly vanished into thin air while working one evening. Just like Sigmund, massive search parties couldn't render any evidence. In this case, scent dogs and helicopters were utilized, which are very effective tools in disappearances involving forests. The dogs picked up his scent in the place he was known to be working, but lost it only feet away as if Travis flew into the sky. The searches continued until the 5th day when Travis just reappeared on the side of the road near Heber, Arizona, which is about an 11-hour walk from his last known whereabouts. Luckily, Travis was alive. And Travis had quite the story to tell. On the night of November 5th, 1975, he had been riding in a truck with 4 other workers when they encountered a saucer hovering above about 110 feet. The saucer was emitting a buzzing sound that seemed to cause the men to feel disoriented. Travis left the vehicle to investigate the strange UFO when a beam of light appeared from the saucer. This light knocked him out cold upon touching him. Once he awoke, he found himself in a sterile white room where he was being closely observed by 3 short, bald creatures. Travis began to struggle and fight until a human wearing a helmet escorted him into another room. There, 3 other humans attempted to put a plastic mask over his face, which seemed to knock him out yet again. After that moment, his memory goes completely dark until he found himself walking along the road in Heber, Arizona. It is worth mentioning that the men that Travis had been driving with were able to corroborate at least part of his story, though they were very reluctant to come forward. But just like Sigmund, Travis went missing under eerie circumstances for exactly 5 days, though he managed to live through the ordeal. The coroner claimed that Sigmund's case seemed to be a classic scared to death situation. It is important to note that being scared to death doesn't happen every day. It is incredibly rare. It's so rare that some experts argue whether it is even possible in the first place. I can tell you it absolutely is possible, but it typically takes a special set of circumstances. It basically ends up resulting in a heart attack, which is difficult to detect on autopsy because it presents identical to any other heart attack. When we are scared, our body releases catecholamines, which includes dopamine, epinephrine, or adrenaline. The levels released are dependent on how big that scare is. If a very large amount of adrenaline is released in a very short span of time, it can cause immediate damage to the heart, but it is still very unlikely. Our bodies are a well-oiled machine. Of course, things can go wrong. We can fall ill, or our immune system can turn on our body, inducing an autoimmune response. But in most cases, we are built to be able to endure our defenses and our normal functions. Catecholamines are released for a reason. They greatly aid in pain and can also help us jump into our fight or flight response, which can better enable ourselves to save our own lives. We are hardwired to be able to withstand these responses. However, like any machine, we can become worn down over time. Sometimes our heart endures damage slowly over a span of years, making it unwell. Our diets, genetics, and sometimes habits can hinder their function. We can end up with arrhythmias, congestive heart failure, and blockages. This makes our ticker vulnerable. Sometimes acute trauma can cause a shock response as well as an overabundant amount of catecholamines to be released. Burns are one of those things. Sigmund had some nasty burns on his body, so he was likely already in a state where his body was releasing these chemicals. Additionally, he was a 56-year-old male, which gives him a statistically higher probability of having some form of damage to his heart. Something obviously came along and gave him a really good scare, causing his body to release more and more of these catecholamines. This proved catastrophic. This triggered a massive heart attack. The only saving grace is that Sigmund's actual death was likely the least traumatic thing for him to go through in that 5-day span. It killed him in moments. It happened so quickly that his expression never changed from that of pure terror. He likely just felt a huge rush of adrenaline surge through his system, a sensation that we all know well. It's as if we are springing to life. Sometimes a pulling sensation on the neck and arms occurs. Usually we aren't too aware of the actual feeling as we are fixated on the actual cause of the scare and surge. But then it was over for him. He was released from his coils of fear and angst. I'm not convinced that whoever or whatever placed Sigmund on that pile of coal meant for him to die. Something strange to note that could very well be completely irrelevant is that activated charcoal is known to help with a lot of ailments. It can be great as a detox and it can relieve rooms of nasty smells. But in addition to all of that, sometimes it's applied to wounds and burns. It is believed to not only help pull out toxins from the wound, but it can also help to accelerate healing. Now, he was found on top of just regular old coal. I am not sure if it had been processed in any way or not, but perhaps whatever placed Sigmund there knew something that we don't. I feel like it's worth mentioning. I mean, it's a Looney Tunes place to leave a body. Obviously, it is going to be found. A regular old murderer probably wouldn't waste the time of dragging him up there. Also, there were no drag marks, footprints, or disturbances of any kind. Regardless of how he got up there, I believe that he was alive when he did. So what in the world did all of that to poor Sigmund? He was just a docile man who was hardworking and sensible. He wasn't exactly extraordinary in any way that we know of. So why and how did he suffer such an extraordinary and mysterious death?